Hello, this is Rachel from the Shades of Orange. Today I want to do a wrap up of all the horror I read in the month of April. Starting with Ring by Kōji Suzuki. This is a book that follows an investigator who is trying to find out what happened to 4 people that mysteriously all died at the same time of unknown causes. He discovers that they all watched a video and then proceeds to watch that same video himself. At the end of the film, there's a message saying that he is going to die in exactly 1 week after watching this. So what proceeds is a sense of dread because he is afraid of his impending doom and is trying to figure out desperately how to survive. I found this book to be a little underwhelming only because I was comparing it so much to the film. I think a story like this works really well on the screen because it is so much about the video itself. So I know my opinion was colored. I didn't really just connect with this one as much as I would like to. I do think it was well written and it did have a good sense of impending doom, but I personally like the film better, which is a terrible thing to say as a reader, but I know other people love this one, and if you haven't watched the film, I think this is a great one to pick up and go into blind. So that is The Ring by Kōji Suzuki. Next, I read a book I received from the author, and that is The Night in My Room by Chris Sorensen. And this book I enjoyed so much that I did a separate review on that. If you haven't watched it, I'll give you a brief synopsis. It follows a couple who move to a small town and move into a home. The main character is an audiobook narrator and sets up his studio in the basement. The author himself is also an audiobook narrator, so I feel like he brought a lot of his own experience into the story. Of course, this home is old and decrepit and possibly haunted, and things get creepy from there. I just loved everything about it. I thought it was well written with well-developed characters, and the plot was fantastic. I thought the ending was just about perfect and really enjoyed it. So it's one that very much surprised me, especially because I don't love haunted house stories normally. So I definitely recommend this one. I do have a longer review, so I will put a card to that at the end of this video. But needless to say, I do recommend it and would love to know your thoughts if you have also picked up and read this book. Then I read a book that I received from Apex, and that is Breaking the World by Jerry Gordon. This follows a group of teenagers that are stuck inside of the compound in '93 during the FBI siege at Waco, Texas. And this story is so fast-paced. I flew through it. It starts in the middle of the action, in the middle of that standoff, and it really does not stop. Now, even though I'm very much a plot-driven reader, I do wish that it had more character development in this story because I never became particularly attached to any of the characters. I thought that the character of David Koresh was very interesting and would have liked to see more about him, but needless to say, it was still a very fast-paced read. I think it has a lot of appeal for people who have more experience or familiarity with the siege. I realize that I'm probably not the target audience for this book because I was too young to remember the events at the time, and it's just not a part of history that I'm too familiar with. And it's very much a story with a lot of realistic horror because the terror really comes from a real situation that did happen. So while this wasn't a perfect book for me, I do think there's an audience for it, and again would recommend it to people who want to read more about that historic event. Now I want to talk about novellas, and I read Korean Road by Brian Scutt, which I received a copy from the author, and this follows an elderly man named Dick who served as a Marine during the Korean War. He is haunted by his past, remembering the death of his comrades, and really has never gotten past those events. And this book is very dark and grim in nature. It's not a nice book. The character Dick is not a nice man. In fact, he is a very unlikable character done on purpose. He is gruff and frustrating and actually quite racist. So you need to be okay reading about unlikable characters. I don't mind that at all. I find them very fascinating, and this one was very well developed. The writing in this was very easy to get into. I read this all in one sitting and was very gripped by the narrative. But again, it's very dark in tone, so you need to be ready for a story like this. It's not the kind of fun horror I sometimes read, but instead it's very much a story where the horror comes from the terrible thing that people do in these war situations. Even if you're not someone who reads a lot of military fiction, I still think you can enjoy this narrative just because I really don't read about wars, but I was again completely gripped into the story. So again, that is Korean Road, and I do recommend it. The other novella I read this month was Dead Trees Give No Shelter by Wil Wheaton. I listened to this on audiobook, which was narrated by Wil Wheaton himself. And quite honestly, I enjoy everything that Wil Wheaton narrates, so that definitely influenced my enjoyment of the story. This particular story follows a man who goes and watches the execution of the man who was convicted of murdering the main character's brother. And then from there, he goes back to his hometown. Before the man's execution, he says that he is innocent, and now our main character is revisiting what actually happened to his younger brother all those years ago. I really enjoy horror that delves into child's imagination and asks the question whether or not something supernatural is actually going on, and this one definitely fit that narrative bill. Just like the last novella I talked about, this one is also very grim and dark in tone. I found the execution right at the beginning to everything that transpires to be very grim, and again, you have to be in the right mood for those kind of stories. It was actually a very tough month for me, and I don't know why I picked up so many dark stories, but I did think the story was very well done, very engrossing. I found the ending a bit unbelievable, but if you can get past that, it was still an enjoyable story, and again, if you can get it on audiobook so you can listen to Wil Wheaton narrate it himself, it was a good story, and I do recommend that one as well. Finally, I want to talk about graphic novels, and I read a fantastic manga this month called Uzumaki by Junji Ito. This is about a small town that is haunted by spirals. And this story was recommended to me by Devin from Insomniac. And I'm glad he told me to check it out because the plot sounds ridiculous. I did not believe him that this would be scary, and this was amazing. This story follows a small town in Japan that is haunted by spirals. And I did not think that a pattern could be scary. I thought this sounded ridiculous and nuts, and it kind of is, but then I got so drawn into the story. The story starts focused on a man who personally starts to see spirals everywhere and becomes obsessed. And that obsession just spreads throughout the town. And when I was reading this, I started to see spirals places, and it very much is a story that gets in your head. If you enjoy psychological horror, this is definitely one to pick up. It's not scary in the sense you would expect. There is no monster jumping out around the corner, but I actually found this one terrifying. This is probably one of the scariest books that I have read. It completely gave me goosebumps, and if you haven't read it, I encourage you to try it out. I could see some people reading it and not connecting with the story and thinking that I'm crazy for being terrified of spirals. But if you're like me and just get pulled into the story, it's so immersive and it really plays mind games with you. So again, if you like that psychological horror, I definitely recommend picking this one up. It's so well done. It's all done in black and white like traditional manga. And I just thought it was terrifying, so I cannot recommend that one enough. Then I read a graphic novel called Outcast by Robert Kirkman, which follows a man whose family has been long affected by possession. His own mother was possessed and other members of his family. And then he has potentially the ability to cast out demons and works with a priest in the present day. I found the story to be a little bit confusing in terms of narrative. The artwork was alright. I really liked the color palette, but I didn't really like the drawings themselves. It wasn't one I particularly connected with, but I've always said that I really enjoy possession stories, so I did enjoy those aspects to it. I'm not convinced if I'm going to continue on with the later volumes, but it was still an interesting one to read. And finally, I'm also reading Robert Kirkman's other series, The Walking Dead. I've been binging through the last few volumes and really enjoying it still. I'm also binging through the TV show. We're now on season 5, and the fact that I'm watching the show is affecting my feelings towards the graphic novels. I'm enjoying both mediums, but because the TV show is going into more detail, I'm finding that the graphic novels just aren't fleshing out the characters and story as much as they want to. So the comparison isn't really fair, but it's happening. Regardless, I'm still really enjoying the graphic novels and will definitely keep reading them. I'll try not to talk about them in every single one of these wrap-ups, but I'm just really obsessed with zombies right now. That's it. That is everything I read in the month of April in terms of horror. Watch for my second wrap-up. That should be coming soon. Otherwise, hope you're having a good one, and I'll talk to you again. Okay, bye-bye.